You never think about the shoes on your feet, but for almost all of human history, every step was a small negotiation with leather that didn't care about your foot. Shoes were stiff, identical on the left and right, and never built for the person inside them. Soldiers marched barefoot because their boots wore out. Pilgrims walked hundreds of miles in shoes that reshaped their bones. A bunion was once a fashion statement. This is how people walked before the shoe learned to fit, and what it cost the ones who couldn't stop walking. Imagine a Cambridge street in the late 1300s. A woman walks toward you in long, pointed shoes, the poulaines that fashion demanded, the toes extending well past her feet like something alive. She is wealthy. You can tell by her shoes. She is also being damaged by them. You can see it if you look closely. Her gait has adjusted. The foot cannot rest flat, so the heel strikes first and the body rocks forward onto the ball of the foot, the way a person walks on tiptoe without intending to. The pointed toe pushes her big toe sideways against the second toe year after year. By the time she is 40, the bone at the base of that toe has begun to drift outward. The joint has thickened. The foot she walks on is no longer the foot she was born with. For centuries before this moment, European footwear was made a particular way. A single last, a single shape, and both shoes of a pair identical. Left and right did not exist. There was only a foot-shaped object, and the foot that had to fit inside it. Archaeological digs across medieval Europe keep finding the same thing. Shoes that are mirror images of each other because they were never designed for mirror images at all. The economy of the workshop and the geometry of the foot were never the same problem. The workshop won every time. This was not a small inconvenience. A Cambridge study of 107 skeletons from the 11th to the 15th centuries found that bunions, that bony bump at the base of the big toe, appeared in only 6% of skeletons from the 11th through 13th centuries. By the 14th and 15th centuries, after the poulaines spread through the wealthy classes, the rate had climbed to 27%. 3 skeletons out of every 10 had bunions. The fashionable medieval shoe was, slowly, breaking the foot it was meant to protect. Bunions were especially common among wealthier urban dwellers and clergy, the people who could afford to keep up with the fashion, and a bunion was not a cosmetic complaint. The same study found that skeletons with hallux valgus were significantly more likely to carry healed fractures of the wrist and forearm, the kind you get from falling forward onto outstretched hands. The shoe destabilized the woman wearing it. The body compensated until it could not, and then the body broke. A bad foot, a missed step on a cobbled street, a tumble forward onto the hands. For centuries, this was the expected arrangement. You wore the shoe. The shoe did not wear you. Walking was not a neutral act. It was a sustained negotiation between the body and the leather it had been wrapped in, and most days, the leather won. The cost fell hardest on the people who could not stop walking, soldiers especially. By the autumn of 1864, the Confederate Army of Tennessee was marching north toward Nashville under General Hood. The men had been issued brogans, flat, rigid, hand-sewn shoes without arch support that the soldiers nicknamed gunboats, partly because of their clumsiness and partly because of how quickly they sank. Within a week of hard campaigning, many pairs had worn through. Within 2, they were gone. In some brigades, 1 in 4 men marched barefoot on icy roads through Tennessee. Their feet, exposed to cold and stone for hours at a time, cracked and bled and went numb. The other side had it worse in a different way. The Union Army could replace shoes faster than the Confederates could, but a Yankee who died on the road left his boots on the road. Confederate soldiers stripped the dead of their footwear before the bodies were cold. Good boots were among the most valuable things a soldier could pick up off a corpse. In the Western Front trenches of the winter of 1914, a British soldier stood in water that came over the tops of his boots. The water had been there for days. The trench had filled when the rains came, and the men had nowhere else to stand. His feet went white, then waxy, then numb. He could not feel them. He learned not to think about them. What happens next is the part the men remembered. When they were pulled from the line and allowed to warm up, the feeling returned. Circulation came back into the frozen tissue like fire under ice. Men described the burning sensation as worse than a bullet wound. The nerves restarted all at once. The damaged tissue woke up, and some of them wept. From that single soldier's warming came 75,000 British cases of trench foot across the war. The Americans, fighting in trenches for less time, recorded about $2,000. Most of the men who suffered it would rather have been shot. There was a different way the shoe won, half a world away. In parts of China, from roughly the 10th century until well into the 20th, a girl would have her feet bound, the arch folded under, the toes pressed flat, the foot broken into a shape small enough to fit into a tiny embroidered lotus shoe. It was the inversion of everything the rest of the world had begun to discover. Instead of the shoe being made to fit the foot was broken to fit the shoe. A 1997 survey in Beijing found that 38% of women over 80 still had bound feet. The practice persisted in some rural villages into the 1950s. A small embroidered shoe could carry a lifetime of broken bones inside it. The pattern held everywhere. Walk far enough in footwear that did not fit, and the foot would either adapt, blister, or break. There was no third option. The world arranged itself around the wound. In the early months of the American Civil War, new recruits drilled on parade grounds where the shoes were indistinguishable. Left shoe, right shoe, same shape, same last. A green recruit could not reliably tell his left foot from his right foot, and when the drill sergeant called forward march, the men stumbled over themselves. The solution, recorded in period accounts and retold in American heritage, was the Hayfoot strawfoot drill. A wisp of hay tied around the left ankle, a wisp of straw around the right. The chant became a nickname for the rawest recruits. The army had to invent a way to teach a foot which side it was on, because the shoe would not tell it. In London, by 1463, the problem had reached the king. Poulaines had grown so long and so pointed that men and women were stumbling in the streets and breaking bones. Edward IV's 1463 sumptuary law restricted toe point length to 2 inches within London, applying to anyone below the rank of lord. This was not a fashion regulation. It was a public safety regulation, written because the shoes were disabling people. A medieval government had intervened in the geometry of footwear for the same reason modern governments write speed limits. The cobbler was the closest thing most people had to relief. In an 18th century workshop, a customer could be measured and returned for shoes in as little as a day, but a pair cost about a day's wages for an average journeyman. Most people owned 1 or 2 pairs at a time, walked them into the ground, and endured the blisters in between. Nothing was thrown away. Shoes were repaired again, and then taken apart for parts that could still be used. A medieval child's shoe, found in a Berlin excavation from about 1450, was 12 centimeters long, roughly today's smallest European children's size, around size 19. A child's foot had been crushed into half a shoe. This was the architecture of survival. A drill chant invented to teach feet apart. A sumptuary law to keep shoes from breaking their wearers. A cobbler measured in days of wages. A child wearing a shoe built for someone else. An entire daily life arranged around the fact that the leather on the foot did not fit the foot inside it. The breakthrough was not a softer material. It was a new idea, and for a long time, almost no one saw it. The idea was this: the shoe should fit the foot, not the foot the shoe. In 1817, a Philadelphia cobbler named William Young began carving 2 different lasts for his customers. left and right, mirror images. He was not the first human to notice that feet came in pairs. The Romans had made sided military shoes, and the knowledge had survived in scattered workshops. But he was among the first modern cobblers to act on it as a matter of principle. For most of his customers, the change was small. For the cobbler, it was a revolution in a piece of wood. The idea did not reach ordinary people until machines could carry it. By the 1880s, the city of Lynn, Massachusetts, had become the shoe capital of the world, with more than 170 factories producing millions of pairs a year. The bottleneck was the lasting room, where a skilled worker shaped the leather around the wooden form by hand. A good laster produced about 50 pairs a day. The work was slow, the leather was tough, and the hand could not keep up. In a Lynn boarding house attic in the early 1880s, a young Surinamese-born man named Jan Matzeliger worked nights after his days in a shoe factory, spending 6 months building a wooden model of a machine no one had ever built. He had no formal engineering training. He worked from intuition and the parts he could find. What he made was an automatic lasting machine, a device that gripped the leather, drew it over the last, and held it in place while the next step happened. When it worked, it produced between 150 and 700 pairs a day, up to 10 times what a skilled hand could do, at half the cost per pair. Matzeliger received the patent in 1883. He sold the rights to a local company. He died of tuberculosis 6 years later, at 36, having never seen the full profit from what he had built. The machines he designed kept running in Lynn factories for decades after his death. The logic was no longer just make the shoe faster. It was now possible, for the first time, to imagine a shoe made for a person. The measuring problem remained. In 1912, an army doctor named Edward Munson X-rayed the feet of more than 2,000 soldiers inside their boots and discovered bones being crushed under load. He designed a new last with toe room and proper width that, when the army adopted it, transformed the rate of foot problems among servicemen. In the late 1920s, a Syracuse University student named Charles Brannock built a prototype measuring device out of an erector set, a metal slide that captured length, width, and arch length in one motion. He patented it in 1928, and during the Second World War, the Army contracted with him to ensure boots and shoes fit enlisted men. The device you still see in nearly every shoe store today became the global standard. The flip happened quietly, not in a lab, not in a fanfare, but across a century of workshops and factories and military hospitals. The shoe stopped telling the foot where to go. You slip on a sneaker in the morning and walk out the door. The shape is yours. The left and the right are different. The size was measured by a metal slide that has been in nearly every shoe store for 100 years. You do not think about any of this, but the cost of what you have stopped noticing is still there, in the bones of every medieval skeleton with a bunion, in the waxy feet of the British soldiers pulled from the trenches, in the barefoot Confederate marchers on the Tennessee ice, in the Chinese women whose feet were broken to fit a tiny embroidered lotus shoe. Walking was once a small daily wound. The shape of a shoe was a decision made by the cobbler, not by the body. Today, the body is the shape. What do your shoes tell you about the rest of the day? And what did it cost to make that question unanswerable? Subscribe to the Origin Portal for more stories of the everyday things we stopped noticing.